My name is Nora Callahan and I was 34 years old, sitting in a hospital waiting room 40 feet from my mother's door. When my sister walked in with a notary, I didn't know that's what was happening. I thought she was bringing flowers. I had been at St. Catherine's for 11 days straight. I knew which vending machine still had the good coffee. I knew which chair in the East Wing waiting room had the broken armrest. I knew the name of every nurse on the third floor day shift because I had learned them the way you learn things when someone you love is running out of time and the only thing left in your control is being present. My mother, Ruth Callahan, had been admitted with a cardiac event on a Tuesday. By the following Monday, the doctors were using words like comfort measures and quality of life in voices specifically calibrated to land softly. She was 73. She was tired. And she had asked me, for days before my sister arrived with that notary, to read to her from the book of Psalms she kept in the drawer beside her bed. I read to her every morning. I brought her the specific brand of peppermint tea she liked from the shop 2 blocks from the hospital. I washed her hair on Thursday because she asked me to and because she said it made her feel like herself. My sister Diane was not there for any of that. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to where this story really begins. Not to the hospital, further back. To a house on Clover Street and 2 girls who were loved in ways that left very different marks. My mother Ruth was a woman built from patience and practicality. She worked 30 years as a bookkeeper for a small manufacturing company, raised 2 daughters alone after my father left when I was 9 and Diane was 14, and kept a house that was always clean and always quiet and always slightly cold in the way houses are when the person running them is too tired to argue with the thermostat. She loved us both. I have never doubted that. But love in our house was not evenly distributed and everyone knew it, including my mother, including me, including Diane most of all. Diane was the firstborn. She had my father's jaw and my mother's stubbornness and a quality I spent years trying to name before I finally landed on it. She was magnetic in the specific way of people who need to be the most important person in every room they enter and have spent a lifetime perfecting the skill. She was also, for most of our adult lives, struggling, not visibly. Not in ways that would make a stranger look twice. Diane had a good apartment, a decent car, a rotating cast of friends who adored her and a series of business ideas that launched with enormous energy and dissolved quietly 18 months later. She borrowed money the way some people borrow time, with the genuine intention of returning it and the genuine inability to do so. My mother had given Diane money 11 times in the last decade. I know the number because my mother told me once, sitting at her kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, in the careful tone of a woman who needed to say something out loud to make it real. 11 times, Nora, she said. Not a judgment. Just a number. I didn't ask the total. I didn't need to. I could see it in the way my mother checked her bank balance before she bought herself new shoes. I could see it in the way she mentioned her savings account less and less over the last few years and then stopped mentioning it at all. I never said anything. That was my role in the family. The one who saw things and stayed quiet. The one who handled what needed handling and didn't require managing in return. I lived 40 minutes from my mother. I called every Sunday. I drove up when the gutters needed cleaning and when the furnace made the sound it made before it needed a part and when she had a dentist appointment she didn't want to take the bus to. I did these things not because I was keeping score but because she was my mother and she was alone and it was the right thing to do. Diane lived 2 hours away. She called on birthdays and holidays and when she needed something. That was the shape of our family and we had all quietly agreed to its contours a long time ago. My mother was diagnosed with a heart condition 18 months before she was admitted to St. Catherine's. Manageable, the cardiologist said. With medication and lifestyle adjustments, very manageable. My mother took her medication and went to her appointments and told me the doctor seemed optimistic and told Diane nothing at all, which I only found out later and which told me everything about what my mother understood about her older daughter. I drove her to those appointments. 6 of them over 14 months. We would stop at the diner on Route 9 on the way back and she would have the egg salad sandwich she always had and I would have the soup and we would talk about the kind of things people talk about when they are not talking about the thing that is quietly frightening both of them. She told me once, in the parking lot of the cardiology office, sitting in my car with the engine running and neither of us moving, that she had updated her will the previous spring. I didn't ask what was in it. It felt intrusive. She had raised me to believe that a person's financial decisions were their own and that asking about them was a form of greed dressed up as curiosity. She said, "I've tried to be fair, Nora. I've tried to account for everything." I said, "Mom, you don't need to explain anything to me." She nodded. She looked out the windshield at the parking lot for a moment. Then she said, "I know you'll be all right. I've always known that about you." I took it as a compliment. I think now it was also an apology. The call came on a Tuesday at 6 a.m. My mother had collapsed in her kitchen. A neighbor, an older man named Frank who checked on her twice a week, had found her and called the ambulance. By the time I arrived at St. Catherine's, she was stable, but the doctors were not using the word stable in the way that means everything is fine. They were using it in the way that means she has not gotten worse yet. I called Diane from the hospital parking lot. She said she would come as soon as she could arrange things. She arrived on day 4. She stayed 2 nights in a hotel nearby. She sat with my mother for a total of perhaps 6 hours across those 2 days, which I know because I was there for most of them and the nurses mentioned the rest. She brought flowers. She cried in a way that was visible and complete and that my mother reached up to comfort, which is the particular cruelty of being the child a parent worries about. Even at the end, even in her own hospital bed, my mother was still reaching up. Diane left on day 6. She had things to handle, she said. She would be back. She came back on day 9. I want you to understand what day 9 looked like. My mother had been moved to a palliative care room on the 3rd floor. The room had a window that faced east and got good morning light, and I had positioned her chair to catch it because she liked the warmth. She was sleeping more. She was eating less. The nurse, whose name was Patricia and who had a gentleness that I still think about sometimes, had told me quietly that morning that we were likely looking at days, not weeks. I was sitting in the East Wing waiting room at 2 in the afternoon because my mother was sleeping, and I had learned over 11 days that sitting beside a sleeping person you love with your whole chest cracked open is a particular kind of exhausting that requires occasional retreat. I was drinking the good vending machine coffee and reading nothing on my phone when Diane arrived. She came through the main entrance with a bag over her shoulder and a man I didn't recognize walking beside her. The man was carrying a briefcase. He was wearing a lanyard. I thought he was a hospital administrator. I thought Diane had arranged some kind of care consultation. I thought, with the specific relief of someone who has been carrying something heavy alone for too long, that my sister had finally shown up to help carry it. I stood up. I smiled. Diane saw me and something crossed her face that I couldn't read quickly enough. A flicker. An adjustment. Then her regular expression returned and she hugged me and said she was sorry she hadn't been there more and that she was here now and that the man with her was just someone helping with some paperwork. Just paperwork. I sat back down. I finished my coffee. I looked at my phone. Outside the window, the afternoon was going gray. I did not follow them down the hall. I have thought about that moment many times since. Whether I should have followed. Whether some instinct tried to surface and I pushed it back down because following felt like suspicion and suspicion felt like a betrayal of my own family. I stayed in that chair for 45 minutes. When I finally walked back to my mother's room, the man with the briefcase was gone. Diane was sitting beside the bed holding my mother's hand. My mother was awake. She looked at me when I came in and her expression was the one I had seen on her face in the parking lot of the cardiology office. Not guilty. Something more complicated. The expression of a woman who has done something she is not certain about and has already decided it is too late to undo. I sat on the other side of the bed. I took her other hand. We sat like that, the 3 of us, for a long time without speaking. The monitor beeped steadily. The east window had gone dark. My mother died 4 days later. Quietly, in the early morning, with the room still gray and the monitor making the sound monitors make and my hand in hers, Diane was not there. She had gone back to her hotel at midnight. I had stayed. I called her at 5:47 a.m. She arrived at the hospital at 7:15 and cried in the hallway in a way that the nurses stepped around carefully. I stood beside my mother's bed and held the specific stillness of someone who has just lost the person who knew them longest in the world. The funeral was on a Saturday. Gray sky, folding chairs, the smell of cut flowers and old wood in a church my mother had attended for 30 years. I gave the eulogy. I talked about egg salad sandwiches and Sunday phone calls and the way she laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. I talked about the patience she had and the quiet strength and the way she loved people in practical ways that never announced themselves. Diane sat in the front row in a black dress and wept beautifully. Afterward, at the reception, her husband pulled me aside and said, with a gentleness I now understand was not accidental, that there were some estate matters that would need to be addressed soon and that Diane wanted to handle them as quickly and smoothly as possible. But I said of course. I said whatever needed to be done. I didn't know yet what had been done while I was sitting in a waiting room drinking vending machine coffee 40 feet from my mother's door. I found out at the will reading. The attorney's name was Martin Fellows. He had handled my mother's affairs for 12 years. His office smelled like old paper and the particular mustiness of files that have been opened and closed many times over many years. Diane and her husband arrived together. I arrived alone. We sat across a small conference table, Diane and her husband on one side, me on the other, Martin Fellows at the head. He opened his folder. He cleared his throat. He looked at me over his glasses in the way that attorneys look at people when they are about to say something that will change the shape of the room. He said my mother had executed a codicil to her will 9 days before her death. A codicil. An amendment. A document signed in a hospital room on day 9 while I was in the waiting room 40 feet away believing the man with the briefcase was a hospital administrator helping with paperwork. The codicil restructured the estate. My mother's house on Clover Street, her savings account, her investment portfolio, her jewelry, total value approximately $410,000, had been redirected. Diane was named primary beneficiary of the estate. I had been left my mother's china set and a specific pearl necklace my grandmother had given her. The china set was worth perhaps $200. The pearl necklace I already knew had a broken clasp. I looked at the codicil. I looked at my mother's signature at the bottom. The signature was hers. I would know it anywhere. But the hand that wrote it was thinner and less certain than any signature I had seen her make in 30 years of watching her sign things. I looked at Diane. She was looking at the table with the expression of a woman who is prepared for this moment and is now executing the preparation. I asked Martin Fellows one question. Who witnessed this document? He told me. A notary named Gerald Sims. And one other signature on the witness line. A name I didn't recognize. Not a nurse. Not a doctor. Not anyone who had been part of my mother's care for 11 days. A stranger. And a notary my sister had brought in a briefcase. I want to ask you something. Have you ever understood something completely in a single moment and felt the understanding arrive not as a thought but as a physical sensation? Like the floor shifting slightly under your feet. That was me. Sitting across from my sister in a dead woman's attorney's office 3 weeks after I had washed my mother's hair because she said it made her feel like herself. I said nothing at the will reading. I thanked Martin Fellows. I stood up. I put on my coat. I walked past my sister without looking at her. Her husband said my name once near the door. I kept walking. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time. Long enough for the gray afternoon to start going dark. Long enough for my hands to stop shaking. Then I thought about something my mother had said to me once, standing in her kitchen on a Sunday afternoon with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. I've tried to be fair, Nora. I've tried to account for everything, and I thought about the expression on her face when I walked back into that room on day 9. Not guilty. Something more complicated, and I started to wonder whether my mother had accounted for something else entirely. Something she hadn't told me about. Something she had perhaps left for me to find. I picked up my phone. I called the one person I could think of who might know, and what she told me changed everything I thought I understood about that hospital room. The person I called was Patricia. Not a family member. Not an attorney. The nurse on the 3rd floor day shift whose name I had learned on day 2 because she had brought my mother an extra blanket without being asked and I had thanked her and she had said your mother told me you'd be the one who noticed that and I had filed that sentence away without fully understanding it at the time. Patricia answered on the 3rd ring. I told her who I was. I told her what I had just learned in the attorney's office. I told her about the codicil and the notary and the man with the briefcase. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then Patricia said, "I was wondering if you would call." Here's what Patricia told me. She had been on shift on day 9. She had seen Diane arrive with the man carrying the briefcase. She had seen them go into your mother's room. She had not been asked to witness anything, which she noted because in her experience notaries brought to hospital rooms to execute legal documents typically asked for a staff witness. They had not asked. She had checked on my mother 40 minutes after they arrived. The man was gone. Diane was sitting beside the bed. My mother was awake, but Patricia described her as appearing fatigued and somewhat distressed, which was a clinical way of saying something I already understood. Patricia said something else. She said that the following morning, on day 10, my mother had asked to speak with her privately. That my mother had held her hand and said something that Patricia had written down afterward in her personal notebook because it felt like the kind of thing that should be written down. What did she say? I asked. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your mother said, I think I made a mistake." And then she said, "Nora will find the envelope." I closed my eyes. Nora will find the envelope. I drove to my mother's house on Clover Street the next morning. It had been 3 weeks since her admission. The house had been kept locked. I had a key. I had always had a key. I let myself in through the front door and stood in the hallway for a long moment, breathing in the smell of the house, the particular combination of her hand cream and old wood and the faint ghost of the peppermint tea she drank every evening. I went through every room methodically. Not frantically. The way my mother had taught me to do things, carefully and in order, because careful and in order was the way things got done correctly. I found it in the third place I looked. In the drawer of her bedside table, beneath the Book of Psalms, beneath a photograph of the two of us taken at Christmas 3 years ago, there was an envelope. My name on the front in her handwriting. The handwriting from before the hospital. Steady and clear and entirely hers. I sat on the edge of her bed and I opened it. It was 3 pages. Written over what I could tell from the ink and the slight variation in her handwriting were at least 2 separate sittings. The first page was dated 8 months before she was admitted to St. Catherine's. The last paragraph was dated 2 weeks before. I am not going to give you every word. Those belong to me. But I will tell you what mattered. My mother knew what she had signed in that hospital room. She wrote that she had not been coerced in the way that word is usually understood. Diane had not threatened her. She had not been cruel. She had been, my mother wrote, simply herself, which was a particular kind of pressure that Ruth Callahan had never in 60 years learned to resist. Diane had come on day 9 with a specific story. The business was in serious trouble. Real trouble this time, not the ordinary trouble that came and went. There was a debt. A significant one. And the house, Diane said, was the only thing that could resolve it cleanly. It was just a matter of paperwork. Just a matter of making sure things were arranged properly. It was the practical thing. My mother wrote that word with quotation marks around it. Practical. As if she already understood by the time she was writing this that the word had been used as a key. She wrote that she had said yes because she was tired and because Diane was crying and because in 73 years of loving her older daughter she had never once been able to watch her cry without trying to fix it. She wrote that she had known, even as she was signing, that something was wrong with the arrangement. That the speed of it was wrong. That the stranger with the briefcase was wrong. That Diane's hand on her arm, steady and guiding, was wrong. She wrote that she had called Martin Fellows the following morning. She had told him she had concerns about the codicil. That she had signed it under circumstances she was not certain about. That she wanted to discuss whether it could be amended or revoked. Martin Fellows had told her that a codicil executed with proper witnessing and notarization was legally valid. That revoking it would require a new document. That he would need to see her in person or have a home visit arranged. My mother had said she would think about it. She had not thought about it for long enough. On the last page, in the handwriting from 2 weeks before her admission, she had written this. Martin has the original will. The one from last spring. He has my letter to him expressing concern about the codicil. He has the date I called. He knows what I intended. He is a careful man and he will answer careful questions carefully. I also want you to know something, Nora. The jewelry in the blue box on my closet shelf is not the jewelry Diane thinks it is. The pearl necklace with the broken clasp is not worth repairing. But the items underneath it in the blue box are worth a great deal. I had them appraised last year. The appraisal document is in the filing cabinet in the study, in the folder marked Household Records. Your grandmother's pieces. I always meant them for you. I should have said so more clearly a long time ago. I set down the letter. I sat on my mother's bed in her quiet house and I breathed for a long time. Then I went to the closet shelf and found the blue box. Under the pearl necklace with the broken clasp, wrapped individually in soft cloth, were 4 pieces of jewelry I had seen my grandmother wear throughout my entire childhood without ever thinking about their value. A brooch. 2 rings. A bracelet. The appraisal document in the filing cabinet confirmed what my mother had written. The 4 pieces had been appraised at combined value of $94,000. They had not been mentioned in the codicil. They had not been specifically assigned in the original will either, which meant they were part of the general estate, but the appraisal document was in my mother's handwriting in a folder she had labeled in my mother's handwriting, and the letter in the envelope made her intention clear. I went to see Martin Fellows the following week. Alone. With the letter, the appraisal document, and a set of questions I had prepared the way my mother had taught me to prepare things. Carefully. In order. Martin Fellows was a careful man. My mother had been right about that. He could not share privileged communications. But he confirmed, without being asked to confirm anything specific, that he had received a call from my mother 11 days before her death expressing concern about a recently executed document. He confirmed that he had in his files the original will executed the previous spring. He confirmed that the original will had not been superseded in its entirety by the codicil, only in specific provisions, and that certain items not specifically addressed in the codicil remained subject to interpretation. He slid a card across the desk without being asked. The name on the card was Eleanor Marsh, estate litigation attorney. I took the card. I thanked him. I left. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and thought about my mother in her hospital room on day 10, holding Patricia's hand and saying Nora will find the envelope with whatever certainty she could still access. She had been right. I had found it. Eleanor Marsh reviewed everything in 5 days. She laid out what we had with the precision of someone who had done this many times and had no patience for softening edges unnecessarily. We had my mother's letter expressing doubt about the codicil, dated 2 weeks before her admission. We had Martin Fellows' record of her call 11 days before her death expressing concern. We had Patricia's account of my mother's distress on day 10, documented in Patricia's personal notebook with dates and times. We had the circumstances of the execution itself, a notary brought by the beneficiary, a single outside witness with no relationship to my mother, a woman in palliative care on day 9 of a final hospitalization. We had the original will from the previous spring, in which the estate had been divided equally between both daughters. And we had the jewelry appraisal in my mother's filing cabinet with my mother's handwritten label and my mother's letter making her intention explicit. Eleanor Marsh said the word undue influence in the particular tone of an attorney who has seen enough cases to know when a set of facts has a shape. It will not be simple, she said. It will not be fast. But this has a shape. She filed the challenge to the codicil 4 weeks after our first meeting. I want to be honest with you about what came next because it was not a clean story with a clear villain and a satisfying ending that arrived on schedule. It was slow. It was expensive in ways I had not fully prepared for. And it required me to sit across a conference table from my sister and look at her directly for the first time since I had walked past her in Martin Fellowes' office without meeting her eyes. The mediation was held 6 months after Eleanor filed the challenge. Diane arrived with her husband and an attorney and the expression of a woman who had spent 6 months constructing a version of events in which she was the one who had been wronged. She had been trying to protect her mother's wishes. She had been concerned about the estate being mismanaged. She had simply made sure that everything was arranged properly before it was too late. She had been, she said, trying to help. I listened to all of it. I sat with my hands flat on the table the way my mother used to sit when she was hearing something she had already decided not to argue with. Then Eleanor laid out the documentation. My mother's letter. Martin Fellowes' records. Patricia's notebook. The timeline. The circumstances of execution. The original will. Diane's attorney was quiet for a long time after Eleanor finished. The mediation lasted 4 hours. I will not tell you every exchange. Some of it is still too sharp to handle without care. What I will tell you is this. My sister looked at me at one point, directly, in a pause between her attorney speaking and Eleanor responding, and said something I had not expected. She said, "Mom would have given it to me eventually anyway." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about 11 days in a hospital. I thought about egg salad sandwiches and Sunday phone calls and furnace parts and gutters and 6 cardiology appointments and a woman sitting in a parking lot saying I've tried to be fair. I said, "I know you believe that." And then I looked back at Eleanor because there was nothing else to say and we both knew it. The settlement was reached before the end of that day. I will not give you exact figures. What I will tell you is that the house on Clover Street was sold as part of the estate and the proceeds divided according to the original will, equally, the way my mother had intended before day 9. The jewelry in the blue box was assigned to me specifically, documented and signed, on the basis of my mother's letter and appraisal. Diane received her share of the liquid assets. The codicil was set aside. It was not a victory. I want to be clear about that. There is no version of this story where I walked out of that mediation feeling like I had won something. I walked out feeling like someone who had carried a very heavy thing a very long distance and had finally been allowed to set it down. The house on Clover Street sold in the spring. A young family bought it. I drove past it once after the sale closed, not to see it one more time, just because the road goes that way and I didn't redirect myself. The new owners had painted the front door blue. My mother's door had always been red. I looked at the blue door for a moment from the car and then I kept driving. I have my grandmother's brooch. I wear it sometimes on the occasions my grandmother would have worn it, which is to say the occasions that feel like they require something carried forward from a long way back. I had the pearl necklace with the broken clasp repaired. It is not valuable. But it was hers and she wore it and that is its own kind of worth. Patricia and I have had coffee twice. She is the kind of person who notices things and writes them down and believes that what she notices matters. I think about what she said my mother said to her, the morning after day 9, holding her hand. Nora will find the envelope. Not I hope Nora finds it. Not maybe Nora will find it. Will. The particular certainty of a woman who knew her younger daughter the way only a mother can, which is to say all the way down, past the parts that are visible to anyone, past the parts that are visible to me. She knew I would stay when everyone else left. She knew I would notice the broken clasp. She knew I would open the filing cabinet and look in the folder marked household records. She knew, in the way she always knew things about me without my having to say them, that I would find what she left and I would know what to do with it. My sister and I do not have a relationship now. This is not a dramatic thing. There was no final scene, no confrontation where I said the thing I had been carrying and watched her face understand it. We simply moved into separate distances and stayed there. We exist now in the way of people who share a history and have agreed, without discussing it, to carry their portions of it separately. My mother would have been sad about that. I know she would have been sad. She spent her whole life trying to hold the two of us together with the specific tired love of a woman who understood she was the only thing keeping two very different people connected to each other. But she is not here to be sad about it. And I am not going to carry her grief on top of my own. What I carry instead is this. A woman in a hospital bed on day 10, tired and uncertain and already running out of time, held a nurse's hand and said 3 words that were also a kind of faith. She did not know for certain that I would find the envelope. She did not know for certain that I would know what to do. She did not know for certain that the careful trail she had left in the places she knew I would look would be enough to undo what had been done while I was sitting 40 feet away believing my sister had brought flowers. But she knew me. And knowing me was enough for her to believe it was worth trying. That is what I think about when I think about my mother. Not the hospital. Not the codicil. Not the mediation or the settlement or the blue door on a house that used to be red. I think about a woman who loved both her daughters imperfectly and spent her whole life knowing it and trying to account for it and finally, in the last days she had, leaving a trail of careful breadcrumbs in the places only one of them would think to look. She could not fix what she had done in that room on day 9. She was too tired and too sick and too much herself to undo it in the time she had left. But she left me what she could. A letter in blue ink. An appraisal and a filing cabinet. A nurse who wrote things down. And 3 words spoken to a stranger who understood they were meant to travel. Nora will find the envelope. I did, Mom. I found it. If someone left something for you, a word, a document, a quiet act you didn't understand until later, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you the way I hope it did, share it with someone who needs to hear that the people who love us quietly are sometimes the ones who protect us the loudest. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.